All right, now that you've completed the easy version of inheritance, which, as you notice from your bell work, does not have a lot of applications in the human body, we're going to go on to the little bit more complicated version of some of the traits that are passed along in humans. Okay, so these are all non-Mendelian traits. So what I would do is go through and number these and make sure you can keep these straight, because these will be coming up a lot in the next week and a half. So sex-linked is our first one. As you know, we have sex chromosomes, and we have an X and two X's for females, and we have an X and a Y for males. So most of our traits that we pass along that are sex-linked are X-linked. So they are only passed on the X chromosome. All right, so this becomes important in the difference between males and females. Okay, the Y chromosome is much shorter and doesn't carry as many genes, so most of these that we talk about are going to be on the X-linked. And if you look down here, it says we use X's and Y's with superscripts. So basically we're going to be doing what we were doing with our last Punnett squares, but we're just going to add X's and Y's. So if you have a female, you're going to write XX. Male, you're going to write XY, and then you're going to show dominant or recessive alleles after that. Okay, so here's an example. This is also an example of why you don't find pictures off of Google, because sometimes they don't do the genetics perfectly right. So I've written it correctly. If you've ever heard of hemophilia, it's a blood disease that is passed on as a sex-linked trait. In this case, we have a mother that is a carrier. So what that means is she has one of the recessive alleles, so she is heterozygous, but she does not have the disease because she doesn't have two copies. And then we have a male who is not a carrier that are going to have kids. So they want to see what the chance is that the kids would have hemophilia. So she has a dominant allele and a recessive allele. He just has a dominant allele and nothing on the Y, because the Y doesn't carry this gene. So when you cross them, we have a normal female with 2 copies of the dominant, a normal male with 1 copy of the dominant trait. Then we have a female that is going to be a carrier with the dominant and the recessive. And then this poor little guy, which is why he is not smiling, carries the trait. Because he only has 1 X chromosome, he only needs 1 copy of the recessive trait for it to show up. So unfortunately, males, you have the short end of the stick on this and are going to be way more affected by X-linked traits than females. So color blindness and balding are all ones that affect males more than females, along with hemophilia. So if you look here, these are some sex-linked practice problems. What I want you to do is at least try one of these and pause your video, write it out, and then in about 2 seconds, there'll be the answers that show up. So don't press play until you have done that. I am going to check to make sure you have at least attempted one of them in your video notes when I check them next class. All right, so here are your answers, and if you look, you have the ones that are highlighted are the affected for each number 1, 2, and 3. And if you make sure on number 3, if you did it, that you don't have anything on your X's and you have the trait passed along only on the Y chromosome. All right, so now we have our second example. This is called incomplete dominance. So we had complete dominance, which was simple dominance for Mendelian traits, meant if the dominant was there, it was totally dominant over the other one. In this case, however, neither allele is going to be totally dominant over the other. Here is where this becomes important. So I told you last time that you needed to make sure that you only used 1 letter for our first crosses. This is because in these traits we are going to use 2 different letters. All right, so we use those to show that these are going to eventually be different than the simple dominants. We only have 2 possible alleles, but the heterozygous form blends them. What that means is that this one and this one have different alleles. So we have red and we have white. And this one is a heterozygous of red-white, which makes pink. Okay, so that is going to just be a blend of those two. And we have two different letters. All right, so here is some practice that you can do. Again, pause it. I'm going to make sure you attempted it, and the answers will come up in a second. All right, here are your answers, so make sure you check yourself. On number 2, just make sure the reason why he has to marry a blue or a purple wife, because if he marries somebody with red hair, he cannot have any blue children because he can't get 2 copies of that B allele. Okay, so our third one, codominance. So co usually means like you share something with each other. So again, these alleles, neither of them is dominant over the other, but we still have 2 different letters. This time, however, we produce a third phenotype that shows both of them in the phenotype. All right, so both show up. Co means both show up. Codominance, both show up. All right, so calico cats, great example of codominance. Okay, so if you look here, if we take cattle, we have a red cow, we have a white cow. When you mix the red and the white together, you get roan cattle, which means they are white with red stripes or spots. Okay, so if you notice, they've got 2 different alleles, and then we get a mix of them and both show up. So this is the difference between codominance and incomplete. Codominance, both show up. Incomplete was a blend. All right, so basically like incomplete is like mixing paint colors together. Codominance would be like painting one paint color and then splatting the other one on top of it. So you'd see both at that point. Okay, and this happens in chickens too. So we have white chickens, we have black chickens, and then the white with the one with both the white and the black alleles show up as speckled. Okay, again, here's some practice. Try them, press pause, and then look at them. All right, here are your answers for your codominance practice problems, and you can go on to the next part. Multiple alleles. This means that we have more than 2. So we don't just have a dominant recessive, we have multiple, which just means we have more than just 2 or 3 phenotypes, which we could have many more. Our most common example of this is in humans. Blood type is a multiple allele trait. So if you look at these real quick, we have blood type over here. So we have genotypes right here, and we have the phenotypes, which if you notice, there's 4 different types. We can have a combo of I's with capital letters with an A or a B, and we can also have lowercase i's over here. We also have this example in a chinchilla and other of these animals. So we have 2 dominant copies show up like that. We have the recessive one that shows up albino, and then we can have multiple alleles showing up this way. So there's just the coloring of these animals. Okay, so here's some practice problems for multiple alleles. I would definitely say that these are probably the ones that trip people up the most, so I would pay attention to these the most, because they are combinations of what we've talked about before. And because there's extra letters, it usually does cause some problems when you're trying to keep everything straight. So make sure you definitely try both of these out to get these right, because blood typing will come up on any quiz or a test that comes in near future. So press pause and try these out. Okay, so here's the answer. So there's a couple things I want to point out. On number 1, so this is kind of how they can also do paternity testing a little bit. On a vague example, you could try and do this with blood typing. So this woman, since she's type A blood, can either have 2 copies of the dominant trait, or she can have the dominant with the recessive allele, which gives you O. Her child then, because it is child has B blood, she cannot be IAIA. All right? She has to be this one, otherwise he can't be B, because she has to donate this little copy. Because if she was this, she'd have a kid with either A blood or AB blood. So the man who is IAIB, because he's AB blood, that means he could be the father, because the child got the little I from the mom and got the B from somewhere. So this man could definitely be the child. If we have, for number 2, 2 people who marry that have AB blood, this means that they do not have the recessive trait at all, so no O blood can show up at all. And then once you do the Punnett square out, you get A blood, B blood, and AB blood here. Just to point out again that A and B show up and are dominant. They're actually co-dominant, so that means when they're both present, they both show up. And O is going to be our recessive. So these are the alleles that are right here, which is just written out from that slide before. So hopefully this makes sense. We'll go over it more next class, and we will have more practice problems to do. So if you didn't get it the first time, no big deal. Like always, multiple times to practice it.